Hey, this is Bishop Justin on Affinity Xtra, where we do extraordinary things. Thank you for being on Rock Solid. We are making a special homage. Do you know what that is? Anyway, I am honoring Malcom X. Malcolm, our wonderful, great hero. Why am I honoring Malcolm, you may say? Because the inspiration of Malcolm transformed my understanding of my cultural perspective and my spiritual perspective as well. I've got other heroes that I lean on. I lean on the 3 M's, Malcolm, Martin, and Marcus. Yes, I lean on the 3 of them when I begin to discover my cultural base of where I can go as a black man to find dignity and to find respect. You know, when we talk about Malcolm was inspiring in many ways. I say to you that when I went into Bible college and when I started to study, people said to me, well, what did you study? Yes, we studied lots of theologies. We studied Old Testament theology, New Testament theology. We studied Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, the doctrine of God. We studied homiletics, hermeneutics, exegesis. We studied church history. We studied Pentecostal church history, early church history, medieval church history. We went into the introduction to the sociology of religion. We did the psychology of religion. Can I go on? Can I continue? We did assignments. We wrote assignments. But the biggest thing that awoke me to think about who I am before God was a strange way. I just began to read the autobiography of Malcom X. And yes, I did. And I read the autobiography of Martin Luther King. He will always be my #1 inspiration for my ministry and theology and everything that I do. He's not a saint. He's a human being. That's why I love him. And they are full of mistakes, just like me and you. Sure. So why I think about the 3 M's, so I'm going to do the first M, which is Malcolm, because Malcolm's life for me was a revelation of change. Malcolm also was a challenger of the present status quo, and he was a masculine challenger as well. Many of the texts that I read were so limp-wristed, they were so weak in their reflection, but Malcolm's reflection on culture and history and the reason why we hate ourselves, the reason why we hate our hair. Who told you to hate your hair? He said. Who told you to hate your skin? Who told you to hate your brother? He began to dissect. I call him the prosecutor, because he prosecuted white supremacy, he prosecuted white brutality, and he met it with an equal force. And all of the time that I tried to understand my theology, it was always the turning the other cheek. It was always the reflection of let them brutalize you because it's righteous to be brutalized. And so just as today there are modern questions being asked in liberation and black theology about whether we are in love with suffering, whether we are lifting suffering to be the thing, and we are not questioning why we are so in love with suffering and poverty and believe that this is our ticket into the kingdom of God. And so that is our challenge also, that Malcolm was not prepared to live with suffering. Now, you may say to yourself, was he entirely against Dr. King? In his early writings and his early speeches, because of the influence of Elijah Muhammad, yes, he was very, very strongly influenced to speak against the weakness, so-called at the time, of the Christian perspective. He did not like the way how Dr. King was talking about no separation, but integration. And he was talking about how can you integrate with the one who is committing so much crimes against you? How can you integrate with something that does not love you? You have to start loving yourself before you integrate with somebody else. And so he was focused really on the empowerment of African people wherever they were, and that's why he got support in the church as well as the mosque, that he was in his final days conversing about the universal empowerment of Africans, not only to feel a sense of pride about who they are, but to reflect upon their future together. And it was about them being able to build a financial structure, them to be able to build an economic force, them also to be able to build a cultural force as well, to start recognizing that all the images around you are not necessarily the true images. Malcolm said that one, it says the future belongs to those who prepare for it. The future belongs to those who prepare for it. And that was a very big challenge for us to say, are we preparing for the future? And I read that quote and I read some of the text where I was reflecting. So I looked at a book, which is Dr. James Cone. I love Dr. James Cone. He's one of my senior theologians that I lean into for clarity and understanding of theology from my perspective. And he wrote a book called Martin and Malcolm and America. And that's what he wrote. And the subtopic behind this is a dream or a nightmare. And in the beginning of the book, he talks about the dream or the nightmare. He talks about the latter days of Dr. King and Malcom X being able to get a meeting point where they understood that the things that they spoke about in the past needed to be reflected, adjusted, and recalibrated. For Dr. King, this was his dream of this integrated society had now turned into a nightmare, because every force that was speaking for integration was being pushed back by the forces that were speaking for separation through economics, through just plain bigotry and prejudice and financial muscles. And that's why Dr. King shared a speech that nobody listens to. And that speech is, where do we go from here? And Dr. King started to speak more like Malcolm. And so in their final days, Malcolm and Martin were coming closer together. Why? Because Dr. King had seen that his dream had become a nightmare, because white supremacist structures were not prepared to give up their grounds to share power. They wanted a subservient class, and that subservient class was going to be African Americans. They didn't mind them being free, they didn't mind them having a vote, but they were going to be in a particular place, in the underclass. They must stay in the underclass. They were not going to be equal. And so when you look at the two as they came together, sometimes Malcolm would turn up at a King speech, and he said to Coretta, and Coretta asked him, why is he here to cause trouble? And he said, no, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just here to give them the alternative, that if they don't listen to the reverend, they have to listen to me. And so in the midst of this, you find this rising of Stokely Carmichael as well, in the midst of this as well, and the Black Power movement. So I think that when I reflect upon Malcolm gives us an understanding of not just black pride. I don't like to say black pride, but I say black cultural awakening. Black cultural awakening. And when you look at how Malcolm suffered when they said to him, when he said he wanted to be a lawyer, the teacher said to him, Malcolm, ends, I won't say the N word on this station because we're trying to be politically correct and we don't want nobody to come down and censor me. Anyway, he said, Malcolm, ends don't become lawyers. You need to think lower. You need to put your ambitions lower. From that, this discouraged Malcolm, and Malcolm fell away from education and then flowed into crime. And in his crime spree, he was called Red. And he was called that, and he was just that bad boy. He was a bad boy. That's why people feared him because of his historical elements. Having then converted in prison to Islam, he came out and became a powerful minister and a temple builder. All of that went pear-shaped when Dr. King, when Malcolm realized that the thing that he was following was not in perfection. And then he became globally aware. And this is what I love about Malcolm. He became globally aware of the cultural perspectives of one, where he comes from and how his religion culturally moved around the world. And so going on his travels, he went to Mecca and he went on a Hajj. After he came back on his Hajj, he planted a different movement that was collective, that was supportive of Dr. King. It is so sad, and I suppose ironic, that in that time then he was assassinated. And the 21st of February is the commemorative day of his assassination, that we should remember him. But I think that I would like to remember his birthday more than his death. But I want to commemorate his death on the 21st. So this is some of the words that Malcolm said. It is a crime. It is a crime. The lie that has been told to generations of black men and black women. Little innocent black children born of parents who believed that their race had no history. Little black children seeing before that they could talk, that their parents considered, that they could hear their parents consider themselves as inferior. Innocent black children growing up, living out their lives, dying of old age, and all their lives ashamed of being black. But the truth is pouring out of the bag now. And so that's what I like to call him Dr. Malcolm, but I'll say Malcom X. That's what Malcom X is saying. And I just wanted to register that quote in your heart. So he says this as well. He says, who else but a controlling emotional devil so blinded American white intelligence that it couldn't foresee that millions of black slaves freed, then permitted even limited education, would one day arise up as a terrifying monster within white America's midst. And that is from the autobiography of Malcom X. And I think that now we even see this conversation between ourselves to reflect upon the truth of what Malcolm is saying, that even now we see this arising way before George Floyd's death, way before Tamir Rice's death, way before those wicked deaths that were caught on camera. Amir Aubrey, I'll remember the name very soon. All of these deaths that were on camera, and sometimes there's so many that you forget their names. This is how bad it is. And we look at them and we have to accept that these are the norms for where those people are, but it is still unacceptable. When we think about, we have a smaller names, but they are still significant. Stephen Lawrence's death was a brutal, wicked, racist murder in view of humanity, and yet it almost went unchallenged by the national caucus of our church. And even now, we don't even say to ourselves, okay then, call Baron Lawrence. Let's have a memorial reflection as Black Church on Stephen Lawrence's life. Let's raise £1 million and give it to the Stephen Lawrence Foundation. Let's put something in place. We saw that, and there was no bigger outcry. It's almost like it landed and disappeared. And then afterwards, when the inquiry began to happen, then we began to respond. Malcolm was talking about us by every means necessary. By any means necessary. The Apostle Paul talks about by any means necessary that I may save my own. I'm talking about us by every means necessary. We must now empower ourselves that our children do not suffer the same racist structures that we suffered in school, we suffered in the health service, we suffered in the workplace. Our children must not experience that. And Malcolm showed me this, that if you are going to, and Martin showed me the same thing, that if you're going to bend, the monkey will be on your back. But if you stand up straight, nothing can stay on your back. And we must now stand up straight. I'm going to reflect on something that James Cone says. And James Cone says this. He says, brothers and sisters, the white man has brainwashed us black people to fasten our gaze upon a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white Jesus. we were worshiping a Jesus that doesn't even look like us. Oh yes, he said, just this blonde-haired, blue-eyed white man has taught you and me to worship this white Jesus. To shout, to sing, and pray to this white man's God. And the white man has taught us to shout and sing and pray until we die and wait for death. And wait for our heavenly dream in the thereafter, where the streets are paved with gold. And so that's what Dr. Malcom says to us in reflecting on the way how we have been conditioned to see everything righteous as white and everything unrighteous as black. So here what we go to now, we go to the, yes, there has been that brainwashing structure. But through our sacrificial prophets, Dr. King, we look at Frederick Douglass, we look at Marcus Garvey, we now have a door opening that says to us now, we can now embrace other cultures, other ethnicities on the basis of equal acceptance. We are not going to fall into the foolish trap of supremacy, because that is what Malcolm fell into in his early days, and he had to fight his way out of it. But at the same time, he had to point out iniquity. Yes? And so we now have to embrace all people who want to lift themselves and lift us and empower us and move forwards into equal footing. And so that is the challenge that we have. Whether we are a black church or a white church or an Indian church or a Pakistani church, it doesn't make no difference. Everyone must acknowledge each other's suffering and repent of the actions that we have made to make others feel small. And if it's an institution, the institution must now find a way of reconciling and make sure that there is some sort of reconciliation that creates harmony. And sometimes reconciliation has to be more than words. Reconciliation must now move to the conversation of remuneration, if you like. Yes, it might need financial situations occurring. And you say, where do you get that from, Bishop? I love the stories that the text leaves with us to make us understand what reconciliation is. When Zacchaeus got truly converted, he says, everybody who I've robbed, I'm going to give back their money, and I'm going to give them compensation back again. That is the definition. So yeah, Andrew, while you're giving out that 12 million, you need to also just dig into a little bit more and start with your giving back that money from wherever you got it from. So today we say, thank you, Malcolm, for opening our eyes to not only having pride or having a great reflection of where we come from, but with Malcolm giving us a dream that would now combat the nightmare. And the dream is that we as a people would rise. And through the challenges of our day, we would know that this is the time for us to use the intellectual, spiritual, and emotional capacity that we have today and rise to a new hope that we have in God and in our tenaciousness as a people to rise always through the thick, through the thin, through the trouble, through the strife, and through the difficult times in the valleys, but the valley always comes before the mountain. So stay blessed, and by every means necessary, we will overcome. God bless you.
What's going on, people? I'm DJ H, and make sure you check out all the stuff Affinity Xtra's got going on, man. We've got loads of content, loads of things coming out. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel, you know. Listen, don't go anywhere, you know. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe is the main thing. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it with your brethren, yeah?